It all began in 2011. The news of the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam was announced on national TV. The nation responded with astounding support for the project. It is important to remember that more than 60 million out of 100 million Ethiopians are not connected with the grid. Even in towns that are connected to the grid, inadequate power and frequent power cuts hinders all aspects of life. That is why people with all walks of life have been enthusiastically supporting the GERD. 13 years fast forward, Ethiopians contributed 20 billion baht for the construction of the dam, according to the GERD Project Coordination Office. To date, the GERD is the biggest people's project in the whole of African continent. More than 100 million Ethiopians see the GERD as a symbol of hope, better future that will break the cycle of despair, abject poverty, and darkness. Recently, the people heard news that ascertained their expectations that their efforts on the GERD comes to fruition. 2 additional turbines of the GERD operationalized and began producing electricity. This news was welcomed with anger and rage in downstream country, particularly by Egyptian government officials. Do Egypt come to terms with a new story on the Nile which relies upon cooperation, using the Nile based on equitable and reasonable use without causing significant harm, or still insistent upon maintaining the colonial hegemonic domination characterized by the principle of might is right? To discuss this issue, I talked with the former negotiator of the GERD and water consultant, Ahmed Nagashnoru.
Very recently, Ethiopia operationalized 2 additional turbines on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. What does this mean to millions of Ethiopians who are not connected to the national grid?
More than 60 million Ethiopians do not have access to electricity. That means they are languishing in the darkness. And it is not only the connection, but also we have to know that the generated energy can also be used to ignite some industries which are not functional currently due to lack or absence of any energy source. It will also provide power to our agriculture, which ensures food security, and also to our water supply schemes, which is very much related to health and dignity. It provides power to schools, medical centers where many mothers are dying during childbirth. It provides energy to many development areas that can create jobs for millions of Ethiopians. So it is very much related to the life and the livelihood and the dignity of Ethiopians. So this is really a very good achievement. Had we been fortunate enough, actually, we should have started, the remaining 11 turbines by this time. But unfortunately, due to some circumstances, we didn't, deliver that. But the added 2 turbines are actually a very big opportunity and a very big forward for most Ethiopians, and also for our neighbors who are actually sharing our problems, our aspirations, and our needs.
Following the announcement of this operationalization of these 2 additional turbines, how do you see the reaction of downstream countries, particularly Egypt?
Actually, I'm not surprised by the response of Egypt. When I say Egyptian authorities, this is my disclaimer. Whenever I say Egypt, it is an Egyptian. I am referring to Egyptian authorities. It is very common when Ethiopia diverted the river to give way for construction. There was very big uproar in Egypt. There was demonstrations, and the military was alerted to high level, and the Ethiopians were attacked. And there was at that time a negotiation going on. It was actually stopped for some time. When the first and the second turbines came in, also we faced some type of backlash actually from Egypt. So this time, when the 2 turbines come in, it is. I expected that Egyptians or Egyptian authorities would respond in one way or another, but I never expected that they will take the issue to the Security Council, because the Security Council already responded and resolved the issue on their behalf and forwarded it to the African Union. But since they want to escalate it to the highest level, I mean, they took it to the Security Council, so it was what was being expected. Yeah.
You think Security Council is the right body to resolve this issue?
First of all, when the issue was taken to the Security Council, there is a very big blunder. There is a very big misinformation and disinformation on part of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt. He was referring to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia as saying that Ethiopia retained huge amount of water for completing the construction of the dam. But this is totally the opposite of what the Prime Minister said. The Prime Minister actually rather said Ethiopia is releasing 2,800 cubic meter of water per second on top of what is actually passing through the turbine to downstream countries to give way for completing the construction on top of the dam. So it is totally opposite. And they did that simply to fit the issue into their objectives they want to take to the Security Council. So they talk about Ethiopia retaining the water. But Ethiopia is actually rather releasing the water currently, huge amount of water Ethiopia is releasing to downstream. So the Security Council is not actually the right body to handle this issue. This issue is best handled by the three countries only, because the three countries can understand each other's needs, each other's concerns, and each other's aspirations. They are tied together by the water. Their fate is actually tied together. The role of the third party doesn't have a very big impact on that. So it is important that the three countries resolve. If they don't resolve, it is better that the three countries bring in someone who can also understand their concerns, needs, and aspirations. The Security Council is established for totally different issue, and they don't have the expertise to handle the water issue. And the water is actually considered as a catalyst of cooperation, not an issue to fight over. So also it is important to note that nearly there are 300 transboundary rivers in the world. There are also nearly 300 transboundary aquifers in the world. Each of those basins and aquifers have dozens of challenges. And if the Security Council start handling this issue, they will end up having thousands and thousands of problems, and they may totally, even if they stop for any purpose for which they are established, they will not handle this issue. So the Security Council is not the right body, and they themselves claim that they are not the right body to handle this issue.
Nonetheless, in the letter that Egypt sent to the Security Council, it accused of Ethiopia what it called a unilateral action. Do you see any unilateral action on the part of Ethiopia?
First of all, this is a national project of Ethiopia. Ethiopia actually engaged, for ensuring equitable and reasonable utilization of the Nile water with Egypt and other, riparian countries for 13 years. Ethiopia was also cooperating with Egypt and other countries, for maybe 23 years so far on the Nile. And at one point, like in 2006, the Eastern Nile countries of Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt established a project known as a Joint Multipurpose, a very big project that is jointly prepared, jointly implemented, and jointly operated by the three countries. So Ethiopia took actually 4 of its big dams as a candidate for this project, and one of the candidate was the GERD. And the GERD was actually jointly studied by Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt up to pre-feasibility level. They were part of the project up to 2010. In 2010, Egypt and Sudan walked out of the negotiation for the legal and institutional framework. They also walked out of the cooperation, including the joint multipurpose project. So Ethiopia got frustrated and went ahead with implementation of this dam. So it is a national project they are aware of. Even before the start of the commencement of the construction, Sudan was well aware of and informed about this for the coming project. So Sudan gave green light to Ethiopia to go ahead. So in no way this project can be considered as a unilateral action. But even if it is a unilateral action, there is no any legal obligation on Ethiopia to undertake unilateral action. Egypt has, several strategies to keep upstream countries, from using the water. One of the strategy is to trap the upstream countries into endless negotiation. While the negotiation was going on, we are aware that Egypt was implementing the Salam Canal. That is a unilateral, actually, the real unilateral action. At the same time, Egypt was also implementing the Toshka Desert Project, which is a unilateral action, a real unilateral action. But the GERD is not unilateral. It is a national project of Ethiopia, but they were part of the project. They came halfway with Ethiopia. It was prepared jointly. When they walk out of cooperation and the negotiation, Ethiopia got frustrated and they went ahead with the implementation of the project. Even if it is a unilateral project, it is not a crime anyway.
In that same letter, Egyptian authorities sent to the Security Council, it says Ethiopia's unilateral action breaches international law, and also it breached the Declaration of Principles Agreement that was signed by Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in 2015. Is there any way that Ethiopia's actions, that means the filling in the operation of 2 additional turbines, violate this grand laws here?
There is nothing known as international water law currently, but the 1997 UN Convention, which is the non-navigational law of international water course, it talks about equitable and reasonable utilization and the causing of no significant harm on other users. So this doesn't breach, this doesn't breach any of those obligations. Also, when we look at the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework Agreement, which was recently ratified by 6 upstream countries and will soon come into force, it talks about the same principle. When we come to the Declaration of Principles, which was actually signed in March 2015 by the 3 head of states of Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan in Khartoum, Article 5 talks about, the need for the countries to agree on guideline for forest filling and the annual operation of the dam. So it talks about reaching an agreement on guideline. So the guideline was prepared in 2018, and Egypt refused actually to agree on the guideline. Was jointly prepared by the 3 countries, scientists from the 3 countries, 5 from each. They finalized the preparation of the guideline. The minister of Egypt, Muhammad Abdul Ati, was in Addis. He agreed in each and every part of the guideline. When the minute was drafted and tabled for signature, he actually preferred to go back home and discuss with officials. He went back and they refused to sign. So they rejected the guideline. So it doesn't in any way, breach what is in this Declaration of Principles. So the Declaration of Principle it does not in any way prevent Ethiopia or put any obligation on Ethiopia not to fill. It talks about construction of the dam in parallel with the studies and with the preparation of guideline. It doesn't even request Ethiopia to slow down the construction. And when we talk about the construction of the dam in terms of GERD, when we look at the construction plan, the construction includes the physical work, the installation of electromechanical and hydromechanical work, the filling, and the generation. So everything is being done in parallel according to the DOP. So it is a misinterpretation of the Article 5 of the Declaration of Principle. Otherwise, Ethiopia is doing in accordance with those obligations. It is party to.
So this filling of the reservoir and also the operationalization of turbines is also the part of the project, the part of the construction of the project. So here Egypt seems to imply that as long as there is no agreement, there should not be any more construction to be undertaken on the GERD. Do you think that is what it implies?
Yeah, first of all, Ethiopia invested billions of dollars out of its empty coffer, not the project to be hijacked or, held hostage by any other country. No, Ethiopia will not allow its own national project to be held hostage by any other body. This is very clear. So Ethiopia never entered any such type of agreement or any agreement that have such implication. And also when we look at the DOP, it talks about agreeing on the guideline. Even it doesn't say signing the guideline. It says agreeing on the guideline. There is a big difference. Entering agreement on the guideline and agreeing on the guideline is different. For one thing, it is agreeing on the guideline. Second, it is a guideline, not a binding agreement. The guideline is a simple tabulated, instrument that can be followed during filling and annual operation. Very simple. A technical work that has been done by researchers, completed, that is over. So Egypt is talking about a binding agreement. A binding agreement is a treaty. Ethiopia never, or doesn't want or doesn't start any treaty or water allocation treaty with Egypt. This is something else. This will be actually guided by the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework Agreement. That is another subject. So there is no obligation on Ethiopia to enter a binding agreement. Otherwise, there is also no obligation that can, prevent Ethiopia from going ahead in the filling and operation of the dam.
And from this, we can say that, do you think Egypt is gambling on this idea that as long as we insist on Ethiopia signing a binding agreement, for Ethiopians will not sign, so that Ethiopia will go on and try to continue the construction. So then we will accuse them of doing a unilateral action on the dam. How much profitable will that gamble be for Egypt?
Yeah, this is something that is happening, by the way, for the last 10, 11 years. On several occasions, we witnessed a very big delay, for example, in the process of engagement with Egypt. They cause the delay, then they immediately start blaming Ethiopia for the delay, and they change that blame into accusation. So this is very common. They raise an issue which cannot be accepted by Ethiopia. They know that it is not accepted by Ethiopia. Then when Ethiopia rejects those issues, they go to accusation. So this is a norm for us for the last 10, 11 years, which we went through. So always it is, they are trying to create an issue, then make an issue out of the issue, then take the issue to the international community, and they start accusing Ethiopia. This is something which has been happening for the last 11 years, and we are not actually surprised by that. Otherwise, when the DOP was signed, it was very clear that the countries at that time were contracting an international consultant who will do studies, and from the outcome of the studies, the three countries will prepare a guideline for first filling and annual operation. They agree on that guideline. At the same time, the construction goes in parallel. But somewhere, they killed the study, actually. They killed the study, and they blamed Ethiopia, actually, for killing the study. This is actually what was happening. Then Ethiopia changed strategy and proposed the establishment of, a research team that can directly prepare the guideline. They agreed. We jointly established, the research team, 5 from each. They did the guideline. Egyptian killed the guideline, and they blamed Ethiopia for that. This is actually what has been happening for the last 10 years. So they are actually in the same course now.
Do you believe that when Egyptians request a demand from Ethiopia to sign a binding agreement. They know that from the geographical situation, from the political situation, they know that any self-respecting country, which is the origin of the river, cannot, sign a binding agreement not to use its own water resource without the blessing of downstream country. No country is going to sign that kind of agreement, let alone Ethiopia. So Egyptian authorities are trying to keep the status quo. The status quo means the construction at the stalemate. Things continue as they have been like 1,000 years. Do you think Egypt is trying to maintain the status quo in this way?
Actually, you see, when they talk about this binding agreement, the source of the binding agreement they are talking about is the agreement that was drafted by the USA in 2020, when the countries, agreed to bring in World Bank and the USA as observer, and they started negotiating on the first filling and annual operation. That draft agreement is more of a water allocation than an agreement on the filling and annual operation. And Ethiopia rejected actually that agreement on that basis because Ethiopia never entered the water allocation agreement. Then the issue kept on lingering after that. And the objective of actually that agreement on part of Egypt is, to impose the status quo on Ethiopia. When we come to the colonial era agreements that denied the existence of Ethiopia as a sovereign nation, Ethiopia didn't respond by denying the existence of our sisterly countries, but Ethiopia never recognized the water allocation given to the two countries by those colonial era agreements.
Now, to remind our viewers on that 1959 agreement, it gives 55.5 billion cubic meters of water to Egypt annually and 18 billion cubic meters of water to Sudan. And it gives no liter of water to Ethiopia, which is the source of 85% of the Blue Nile.
They allocated 10 billion additional to evaporation from Aswan Dam. So they are not only maintaining the status quo, by the way, they are by this binding agreements, they are trying to impose. They are trying to impose the status quo on Ethiopia. They want Ethiopia to recognize the status quo disguised as a binding agreement on the first filling and annual operation of the dam. That is why actually that it was not accepted by Ethiopia. It is more of a water allocation than agreement on the dam. So Ethiopia will never actually accept such type of tricked or disguised agreements. If they want a water allocation agreement with Ethiopia, the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework Agreement is already going to be in force. So they can join that, and they can also come in that direction.
Ethiopia could have filled the dam just within 1 or 2 seasons by actually exploiting the maximum potential of the river. But Ethiopia isn't doing that. It is filling in stages from year to year. Now it is 5th season. So do you think downstream countries really appreciated this concern by Ethiopia?
You see, the Ethiopia, even if Ethiopia did, the planning of this dam alone, we considered the concern of downstream countries. We, as much as possible, did our best to not cause significant harm on downstream countries. So for that, we took all necessary measures that prevent the causing of significant harm. Then we also established, immediately after the commencement of the construction, we established by our own initiative, the International Panel of Experts, with 10 experts from the 3 countries as well as 4 international experts. They did the study for full year, and they came up with a report where they showed that both the design and the construction of the dam doesn't cause significant harm on downstream countries. Then we brought them on board for the last 10 years They are working with us. They visited the dam several times, including their ministers. They know actually, for sure, they know that this dam will not cause significant harm on them, and they know that it will have a benefit for them. The only problem is that, one, it is not in the colonial era agreement, because the colonial era agreement, already established a water allocation format, as well as there are, dams that are indicated in the colonial era agreement. The GERD is not in that. So they think that it is, destroying this colonial era agreement. Also, the Constitution of Egypt, for example, if we look at the Constitution of Egypt, I think Article 44 talks about Egyptian government protecting the historical right of Egypt over the Nile water. So they consider the dam is not part of this historical right.
Do you think that kind of mindset, that kind of historical right is a viable option, a viable method in this 21st century, that now the population of Ethiopia is more than 100 million, even the population of other upstream countries, Kenya, Uganda, that is also increasing alarmingly. So those populations need resources. Those populations, huge population, need development for sure. So as long as upstream countries have this need for development, this need for betterment of life, and betterment of life is directly connected to energy provision. So do you think this kind of monopoly approach, the old historical thinking, the colonial narrative, do you think this kind of approach really works at this moment in time for this generation, for this time now?
Yeah, by the way, this is the mindset of the 18th century. Now we are in the 21st century. So there is nothing, such as, for example, there is no colonialism today. I don't see any reason why really we stick ourselves to colonial relics. This is an old thinking, and now this should be actually avoided. And this type of thinking is already rejected by the international community, and it is not existing in any basin currently. So it is only in the Nile. And it is also rejected by all countries in the Nile basin. The only country that really want to stick to this colonial era relics is Egypt. Every country, even the colonizers, are now ashamed of what they did during colonialism, and they are actually, asking apology for countries who suffered from colonialism. So while the colonialists themselves are ashamed of what they did, and I don't see any reason why we who were under colony are carrying, this emblem with us in the 21st century. Currently, the main principles that are governing transboundary water resource management are the equitable and the reasonable utilization, and an obligation not to cause significant harm, and the genuine cooperation. So those are actually the main principles. There is no way, there is no room for the provisions that are actually given by this colonial agreement. So that doesn't have any room, and it is not applicable. And it is not accepted by, and even it is rejected by the British themselves, who actually signed this agreement on behalf of their colonies.
Ethiopia sticks with the latest principle governing transboundary water management, which are equitable and reasonable use of water without causing significant harm. Ethiopians with 100 million population are in dire need of eliminating abject poverty, needless migration, and darkness, which is impossible without the adequate provision of power. The desire and the ability of Nile Basin countries, including Ethiopia, to use the Nile is increasing. Under the face of climate change and water scarcity and legitimate demand by upstream countries to use the Nile, any paradigm of using the Nile seems the only way forward. Cooperation. Win-win approach constructed by mutual trust and understanding are crucial from Cairo to Addis, from Nairobi to Asmara, from Kigali to Khartoum, for a better and brighter future to all the children and daughters of the Nile.